welcome everybody. We wanted to welcome you to our Addressing Racial Injustice webinar. So I will start with a little bit of introductions as well, just so everyone knows who is on the panel. Julie, if you'd like to start and share our first slide so we know where we are and we can do a quick introduction.
So in case you are all wondering, we can watch this webinar a few different ways. So here are some different modes if for whatever reason, whatever mode that you're looking at it right now is not working for you. So the town of Swampscott does have their Facebook live stream going right now for this webinar. It is also on the Swampscott Public Schools YouTube channel, of course Zoom, and then the Educational Access channel.
So we thought we would start with just a quick introduction on what this is and what we are doing. So what we're teaching today, or what you're going to be observing today, is something called a restorative circle. Obviously, this is virtual. This isn't something that we normally would be participating in this forum. So we wanted to give a little background on what restorative practices are, what they mean to us, and how we've been using them as a school at Swampscott High School. So just a quick introduction, our restorative practices, we have multiple goals in them. It includes building community relationships, repairing harm when harm has been done, and to address trauma. A lot of times when we in schools deal with school discipline, we think of what has happened, what rule has been broken, and then we think, what consequence do we apply? The shift in this is what the restorative practice is. We actually think, who did what they did, who did they harm, and how do we move forward, and how do we heal from that harm? This is also proven within school to reduce school to prison pipeline and used to replace punitive discipline. This also builds participants' social emotional skills and also decreases the rates of second offenses. In this seminar or in this webinar that you will be observing today, you'll have myself, Colleen Finn, the assistant principal of Swampscott High School, and Julie Ignaciola, our Swampscott High School health education teacher. So I want to just introduce you to the panelists before we go into a little bit more background of our restorative practices and how this is a modified version of that. So we have Melissa Albert, Swampscott High School World Language teacher, Graham Archer, fire chief, Temi Bailey, our Swampscott High School tutor and Boys of Color coordinator, Al Bangora, Swampscott High School student, Jeffrey Comfort, Swampscott High School parent, Ruth Dorsey, Swampscott Middle School parent, Holly Flanagan, Swampscott High School English teacher, Dennis Cohut, Swampscott High School principal, Ron Madigan, police chief, Christopher Norkin, Swampscott Dean of Students, Latoya Ogunbana, sorry, I always say your name different, medical director, Alexander Roos, Swampscott High School student, Peter Spelius, chair of select board, and Mana Tafar, Swampscott High School student. So those will be the participants that you'll be hearing from in this webinar. So to start with this webinar, we're going to be setting some expectations. If anyone here has ever experienced a restorative circle, and the majority of the participants that are on this webinar have, Swampscott High School had conducted a 4-part training district-wide for teachers and faculty members who are interested in learning restorative practices as a tier 1 universal support for our multi-tiered systems of support. So that means that we'd be using these support services on addressing issues that are happening in the classroom, and like we said, to repairing harm. When something has happened and harm has taken place, what we have is something called this circle that we create. And we usually have the person who's done the harming and the person who's been harmed, as well as stakeholders in that person's life. That often is parents, teachers who are important to that person, community members, whether it's a police officer that they have a great relationship with, your fire captain, etc. When we conduct these circles, we have something called a talking piece. This is a single object that serves as a reminder that one person's voice is what we're listening to at the time. I often use a rock or a pebble that has the word trust on it, as when I'm in these circles, I have already formed trust with these participants, and I am willing to share what is in my heart and what is in my mind. When we have this talking piece, only one person who has it can speak at the time. If someone doesn't want to speak, you have the power of passing. You can say, pass, I'm not comfortable with it. You can say anything if you're not ready to answer that question. Since we are virtual, in place of an actual talking piece, we'll be moving in 3 different alphabetical orders, for which Julie will direct the panelists for. One more thing I do want to actually add to this is that I know a few of our participants tonight were also taking part in something similar last night for the town. So we know that this can be emotionally exhausting, as a lot of emotions do come forward, and it can be very raw. And it can be a lot of times that some of us are actually communicating exactly what is in our heart. So we just want to be aware of that while we're conducting these rounds. And we want to make sure that we get to everybody's point and we get to everybody's feelings, and that we actually truly hear each other and listen. So if myself and Julie start to see that either the panelists are getting tired or that we're losing some steam as far as observers, we may decide, rather than having one of these restorative circles, we might end up deciding to have multiple that address what we planned on today. So I just wanted to make that known. Holly Flanagan, do you have anything that you would like to add as far as setting expectations, as you are trained in restorative practices as well?
I think the wait time for dialogue is really important, and silence is really important as well in terms of the reflective piece, and showing up. And although it can be difficult not to respond immediately to the person after they've spoken, you have something to respond. Just honoring the sense of circle and waiting to come around again. And I think that there's an importance in that, so that it's not just an emotional, impulsive response, but rather a thoughtful, mindful response, that you really listened and heard and reflected. So that part has always been difficult for me and for also the students, but I think it really adds to a level of listening that is rare.
Great, thank you, Holly. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set some expectations or norms, some guidelines that we are going to agree with as a group that we're going to follow. These expectations are going to be for ourselves and also for each other. So what I'm going to start with is what my expectation for this group is, for myself. While I'm listening, I'm going to ask myself to make sure I'm listening to everybody here without any judgment. What I'm asking for others is that you just speak from your heart and that you share just enough. So that's what my guidelines and my expectations are. So I'm going to go through our first circle, even though we won't be able to see the circle. I'm going to ask what expectations we have for ourselves and for each other in this circle. I'll start with you, Melissa Albert.
Hi, thank you, Colleen. So I guess my expectation for the group and for myself, the most important one is to listen from the heart, and really listen and don't, get distracted or kind of zone out or phase out, but really listen to every person with full intent.
Great, thank you. Graham? I think he's on mute.
Sorry. Likewise, my intention is to listen, maybe gain a little perspective for myself and for the group. It's for us to share openly.
Great, thank you. Tammy? Tammy, you're on mute.
Me, just be transparent. Hopefully anything I can say can resonate with anyone, and just hopefully we can all learn from this.
Great, thank you. Jeffrey?
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for organizing this and for inviting these panelists, and it's a pleasure to be here today with everybody. Also, I'm looking to get out of this something positive for all of us, for our community, looking to understand everyone's opinions, looking to listen intentfully so that we can learn from anything that we may think we understand already, but certainly always opportunity to learn more about. So I'm looking forward to a very sort of interesting, fruitful, and very positive experience today. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Al?
My goal in this restorative circle is to help others understand the pain me and my people have been going through for the last couple of months, and I'm hoping to educate those who are uneducated today.
Thank you, Al. Ruth?
Yes, my expectation is today we learn really learn from each other. And so we can add to the expectation that we have before. So be open-minded so we can really learn.
Great, thank you. Holly?
I think a vulnerability in saying I don't know, especially with this topic. I'm here in all my whiteness and saying I have a lot of work to do, and I am a teacher, but tonight, Al, Mater, Temi, Latoya, you are my teachers. Ruth, you are my teachers.
Great, thank you, Holly. Dennis?
To learn, I agree with what everyone's saying. To learn, to listen, and then also with whatever I do learn from today, to think about how we can make that part of what we do at Swampscott High School.
Chief Madigan?
Yes, to learn as well, to listen, to, obviously as the police chief and representative of the police department, it's important for us to understand perceptions of folks in the community more than any time before, and to really internalize that and understand, because police departments are, can be focused in a way that really needs to be understanding and receiving community input and be reflective of the community. So I think that's important. That's my goal here, is to start the process of reaching out to the community and learning from everyone.
Great, thank you. Chris, Morgan?
Expectations for myself would be to listen with my heart. And then expectations for the group would be to say what you mean.
Great, thank you. Latoya?
My expectations for myself are just to listen, and being a person who has a seat at the table, speak honestly. And my expectations from the group are also to speak honestly and speak openly.
Thank you. Alex?
I agree with what everyone says or has said. I would like to add that I think we should maybe propose some concrete solutions if we can tonight or through other webinars about what we can do to move forward and how we can combat racism. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Peter?
My expectation is to remember that the greatest gift out of this for me is listening and hearing. And my expectation for the group is understanding that I need guidance, particularly from the younger ones that are on here. And you have so much wisdom to share, and I'm appreciative of the fact that you'll share it with us.
Great, thank you. So what I heard from that round on expectation is that we all are agreeing to listen and to speak from our heart. We also are agreeing that we want to learn and take something from this. So if everyone is in agreement with that, I would think we would just do a quick thumbs up that we all agree that we are going to listen and speak from our heart, and that we're going to show some vulnerability here. Are we in agreement with the thumbs up?
Does Mater want to add anything to that? I don't know if Mater.
Oh, Mater, did you not? Sorry.
No worries.
Go ahead, Mata. Sorry, my screen. I apologize.
No worries. So, what I want to get out of this is I want to share my experiences in this community as a person of color, obviously, and I also want to listen to what other people have to say to hopefully open up a conversation that won't end when this webinar ends.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mata. So if anyone felt uncomfortable in anything that was said, that's okay. We're all talking with positive intent and speaking with positive intent. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this over to Julie Ignaciola, and I'm going to let her discuss the purpose of this, and then we'll begin our rounds. Julie?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So generally speaking, the purpose of tonight and why I'm so passionate about this is because as an educator in this community, I wanted to make sure that we have an environment for all of us to come together, whether it's teachers or students or community members, to really share our thoughts and feelings after George Floyd was murdered, and especially the conversations that followed that. To expand on that, I have a couple minutes that I just want to add a few things to, and I hope those who are listening to me right now are listening very carefully. Racial injustice does not have a singular lens or cause. So right now, many people are focused on police brutality, which is, everyone has a right to focus on that. That's understandable. But this issue is very, very widespread. So I wanted to just share a few things, a few statistics. My students will laugh because I have sources, so if you want them, students, I'll give them to you. You know how I am, but let me share a few things with you, and I'll tell you why personally I am doing this. In New York City, 88% of police stops in 2018 involved people of Black and Latino descent, 70 of which were innocent. During the 2015 to 2016 school year, Black students were only 15% of the US population for student enrollment, but made up 36% of students who were expelled. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related death than white women. And lastly, on average, Black men in the US receive sentences that are 19% longer than their white counterparts for the same exact crime. So I want that to sink in for a minute and just make you all aware that this is not just about police brutality. This is much deeper than that. So ultimately, I'm here because I am distraught about the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Eric Gardner and the countless others before them. And from the viewpoint of an educator, we have so many students who are distraught by these murders as well. And not only have they personally told me that it has upset them, but they have demonstrated their solidarity with the Black community by organizing marches and protests in the town of Swampscott. They have used their creativity, like you can see on this screen right now, to show that they are listening and they are watching. So as teachers, we want students to take ownership and leadership of their futures. And I am here because I can genuinely say that while my goal of it as an educator is to inspire them to be the best version of themselves, this is really a two-way street. They push me to speak up and they inspire me to welcome the feeling of being uncomfortable and being okay with not having the answers to these problems. I'm here because my best friend, who is a professional rugby player and woman of color, was not able to run as well as she could for the week following George Floyd's murder. This has nothing else to blame other than the effect of, the fatigue she was feeling when she sees somebody who looks like her be murdered in broad daylight. That makes me sick to my stomach. So I am here because as a school and community, we need to listen to one another and have this important conversation, because for some, this is literally a matter of life or death. So for the purpose of tonight's Restorative Circle, I hope to create a dialogue that addresses racial injustice as a means to understand our collective roles and responsibilities in our society, whether administrator, teacher, student, parent, and it is really past time to address these injustices, and hopefully we can strengthen our relationships with one another and create change, and as Alex said, create a better future. So it starts with conversations like this, and that is why I am here. So that is our purpose. That is why I am passionate about this. And we can now get into our opening round of a weather report. So for this opening round, I just want to hear how everyone is feeling at this very moment. So if you could identify yourself as a weather report, what would you be? So we're going to go in the same order as last time, starting with Melissa.
Hi. So I'm feeling pretty sunny and clear and positive at the moment.
Great. Chief Archer?
I would say gathering clouds, because I don't see any way we get through this moment without some turbulence, some storminess. It could be a positive thing, like a rain after a drought, and it could be pretty stormy. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty.
Thank you. Temi?
I'd say like just like a cloudy, gloomy day, only because I'm tired.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Well, I would say, unlike the weather outside, which is beautiful, I think there's some deception sometimes in what people perceive things really are or how they feel about something. So while it's beautiful outside, I feel like it's pretty overcast in general. Overcast with maybe breaks of sunshine, some bright spots, hopefully in what we're trying to accomplish as a whole society. I also feel like it's very windy, lots of winds of change are hopefully blowing our way. So that's good news.
Thank you. Al?
I don't really like know weather that much, but like I would kind of like compare it to like when there's about to be a blizzard and like you're going to the store to buy a lot of food and like stock up because you can't go outside. So that would be my weather report. I'm preparing for a blizzard.
Thank you. Ruth?
So cloudy, very cloudy. Very confused. So very cloudy, and we waiting for the sunshine.
Thank you. Holly?
A summer storm, you know, and the clouds are coming in, it's sunshine. It was actually yesterday's weather here was like that. So it was sunny, and then this, you know, the clouds came in and it was dark and it was windy. I appreciate the wind because there's so much information and there's so many emotions swirling around. So it definitely feels windy to me.
Dennis?
I feel like stuck in a fog bank, and I can't quite see a few feet in front of me. And I think that has to do with the current situation in our country, but also me thinking about what school is going to look like next year. Despite getting a little bit of guidance today, it's still looking foggy. So it's very difficult for me to see where to go.
Thank you. Ron?
I would say cloudy as well, and I'm hopeful that there's sunshine somewhere down the road in the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Chris?
Like Dennis, in a fog, you know, I live in Salem, so the last couple nights and the last couple mornings, it's been really, really foggy. So I just want everyone to know that I'm not thinking clearly, and I've got a heavy heart just for some things that are going on in my family. So I'm just bringing that to the circle.
Thank you for sharing. Latoya?
I would say sunny, with some clouds possibly rolling in. I've been doing my best to take care of myself, take care of the people around me. And now that remote learning is, you know, now that we're here for summer vacation, it's opening up some of the things that I really should be taking care of, including my personal feelings around what's going on internationally, globally, and here at home.
Thank you. Alex?
Mine's a bit of a dichotomy, sort of sunny, but also foggy because obviously unclear about the future, but it's summer, so I think that is helpful to me at least. But yeah.
Thank you. Peter.
I think Alex and I are hanging out in the same neighborhood. My days consistently go from clear to foggy, and then to clear again, and then to foggy again. And it takes a lot of energy to navigate through the fog. And I hope every time I'm in the fog that it becomes clear again.
Thank you. And Mater.
I feel a little bit like a tornado because I feel kind of like powerful and like with all like everything that's going on, kind of like eager to make a change, whether it be in the community or in the world or anything. So, yeah.
Great. Great. Thank you, everyone. Okay, opening round. Now we're going to go into our first round. So hopefully you all had the chance to review this question and the 2 questions that follow, and hopefully whoever's watching was able to see our community memo that went out with these questions as well. So the first question here, the first round, is due to the accessibility of cell phones and presence of social media, we live in a world that makes it easy to share what is called trauma porn. In fact, we know that the video of George Floyd's killing was not the only disturbing video of a person of color's death being circulated through mass media. If you have seen the video circulating of George Floyd's death, whether in segments or in its entirety, how does it make you feel? And if you haven't, did you make that choice consciously? Why or why not? So for this first round, we are actually going to work backwards from what we just did. So Mater, you are going to be speaking first. Just as a reminder, you are able to say pass at any time if you do not want to share. No judgment if you do not wish to speak. So Mater, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So I did see the video a couple of times, and there's no doubt that that was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. And it wasn't even like other videos where like it ends very quickly, like the Ahmaud Arbery one, but it lasted over 8 minutes. Like the 8 minutes of him suffocating. And I've also, seen like other videos, but I feel like that was one of the worst. And it was also in a time where like there was all like other stress going on with the coronavirus, and I don't think like anyone was in a good place to see that. Not that there's ever a good place to see that, but and I think to a certain extent it's something that needs to be seen by people who are, naive to this issue, or they don't really acknowledge it because it doesn't affect them. But these videos circulating on social media so often can be really harmful and traumatizing to people of color that, are already in the minority and deal with racism maybe even on a daily basis. And it's a constant reminder of the horror that we live in. And I feel like certain people of color don't need to be reminded of the life they're already living when they see someone who has the same skin color as them being killed for no reason. And yeah, I think that it's kind of a gray area because it's an important video to show how broken the system is, but it can also be very disheartening and put some people in a very bad place.
Thank you. Peter?
So I have seen parts of the video, and I've stopped and have never gotten past the part where George Floyd is calling for his mother. And even hearing that, until last night, I was thinking about just the sadness of him calling for his mother. And last night when we were having our facilitated dialogue, the facilitator, who enlightened me on so many things, pointed out that George Floyd's mother died 3 years earlier. And he wasn't he was calling her because he knew he was dying. And hearing that, like, it literally shakes my innards, like when I hear that. And I find it tough to watch that video. And I keep asking myself why. And I think it's because I recognize that it's one video, but it's indicative of thousands and thousands and thousands of actions, many of which have never found their way to video. And so didn't get the prominence of this one and the effect of this one.
Alex? Thank you.
I agree with what everyone has said so far. I've only seen segments of the George Floyd killing, so I haven't seen the entire video. But I do think that sharing it, although people might have a good intention, specifically white people sharing it, I feel like it's more a form of relieving like guilt, and I feel like it is a form of trauma porn, and like it almost is a way of instant gratification. Like, I'm sharing this and I'm trying to raise awareness, but like at what cost? Like, people of color go through these things on a daily basis, and being reminded of this is traumatizing. And I think that talking about it, maybe like instead of sharing a video saying that this happened, and not maybe sometimes going into as much detail, can be a bit more helpful. And maybe instead of, sharing trauma porn, it could be replaced with talking about signing petitions that about like the Black Lives Matter movement, and emailing Congress people or providing those links to state representatives about how to act against police brutality. So yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Latoya.
I will gladly admit I did not subject myself to watching the video. For me, I believe victims. I believe that it happened. I didn't need to see it, and I didn't need to watch to feel what I feel. And in fact, I had to protect my own mental health not to watch. The stills, the story that I read, it was enough for me. And I did not, but I know a lot of my students did. And I know that it's particularly painful. But I also know that I have been living in America for my whole life. And this is not the first or the last time where I will be subjected to hearing or seeing a Black body, a Black life devalued or brutalized. It makes me feel really sad for my students who watched it, because there is a loss of innocence, and there's a loss of just being a child. Now it's a whole other layer that you need to look out for.
Thank you. Chris?
I've seen segments of the video, and it initially, the first emotion was embarrassment. I was embarrassed to be an American. Then I felt sick. And then I think I like wrestle with this feeling of being like helpless or powerless and not knowing what to do and with myself or how to address it.
Yeah. Ron?
I did not watch the entire video. What I saw was graphic and painful to watch. When incidents like this, when killings of Black people around the country occur, I often look at them and try to understand and I look at it from a critical standpoint because I want to understand and I want to ensure that what we do in the police department, that we have safeguards in place and policies in place and standards and training that help us have a safe community and have a safe operation, that we can avoid situations that result in tragedy. In this case, it was graphic and painful to watch. As a human being, I was repelled. And frankly, it was incomprehensible to me. I was appalled to see a police officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And even more incomprehensible to me, frankly, was that 3 other police officers stood by and didn't intervene. And that's something that's become the focus of what we're doing now in terms of looking at the operation of the police department, reevaluating our policies, and taking positive steps to really look and understand how that can occur, and put in safeguards to ensure that police officers have a duty to intervene. I understand that affirmative duty that they have to intervene. So from a police officer standpoint, from a police executive standpoint, I want to take steps to really ensure that what we're doing here is correct and our policies are all correct. But really, as a human being, for me, it was incomprehensible that another person could treat someone like that. I too was, I found it heartbreaking to hear that he was calling out for his mother. I just can't imagine how it looks through the eyes of a person of color, frankly. But as a human being, as a person, I was appalled by it. That's it.
Thank you. Dennis?
I saw clips, but I couldn't watch the entire thing. And what is so disturbing is the way that officer looks, like the gesture. It's almost like casual. He has like his hand in his pocket. And it's just that part of it made it so much more disturbing, along with what others have said. And that, like Chief said, that no one did anything. None of those other officers did anything to stop it. And I think when I first read this question, I thought about how in many cases with social media, these events happen and these terrible things get sort of in the feed along with other things, right? It's just one little blip of information along with a sports score and some other information. And this was different, right? People saw this and they reacted to it and decided to do something about it, right? It galvanized a movement that's been going on for years now. And I think I think I often bash social media and technology, but if it isn't for that, right, this movement doesn't happen. And I think if we think back to like the Rodney King situation that happened in the early 90s, that was a grainy videotape. And it was after that, much later, I think, when there started to be change. And I think that the nature of social media being able to capture these things in the moment, and any sort of things that happen that would typically have to rely on like a traditional journalist to cover, I think that's what sort of spurred this movement to change. And I think it also reminded me a lot of Emmett Till, who was a kid who was murdered, I think in the 40s or the 50s, African-American kid, young kid, I think he was like 15. And his mother at the time at his funeral demanded that he have an open casket so that people could see what had happened to him. It was terrible. And that the press could cover it to make sure that people saw this, because I think at that time, these were incidents that weren't typically, covered. So I think it was one of those things that didn't get kind of buried along with whatever else is coming through the feed, and people saw it and reacted to it. And here we are, right, trying to look at this terrible incident and see what changes can we make in our country and in our communities.
Thank you. Holly?
I've seen some of the stills and I've read a lot of the narrative, the stories. I have not watched the whole video, similar to LaToya, my own mental health, but in a different way, in a totally different way. Not with all the pain, obviously, of understanding. But in reading the narrative and looking at the stills, I probably felt like Chris, you highlighted, disgust, shame to be human, sick to my stomach. And then, of course, as a mother, I think that's just where I've been sitting with him calling out for mother, because there's nobody else's children, right? There's no other person's children. We're all their mothers. And even the students in the school, right? Like we're spending hours with them a day in the same way. So that really got to me. And I think I've just been sitting with different stories that I've had taught in the classroom and had conversations in the classroom about man's inhumanity to man within our curriculum. And some of them seem so distant that when we talk about something like Lord of the Flies, and we talk about the context, the historical context, then I don't know that students are really sinking their teeth into it, but this is that same virus. It's that same systemic genocide, right, that we discuss in these other works. I found it grossly ironic that the phrase, I can't breathe, and meanwhile there's a national health crisis where people can't breathe and are suffering this respiratory distress, and yet racism is a virus, right? One thing in closing, man's inhumanity to man. When I've discussed Lord of the Flies and other things in the classroom, we've read an article called "What Makes Us Moral" from Time Magazine, and I've used it year after year, and it's probably the most thoughtful conversation among the students. And it talks about the one thing that humans have that separates us from animals, and that's our empathy, our ability to gain empathy, but that it is and needs to be explicitly taught and reinforced. And that when a person is allowed to be outside the circle or pushed outside the circle, that they don't have a sense of belonging and connection, that they lose that ability to empathize, that humanity. And I kept looking at the still of the officer's face, and someone just mentioned his postures. And I kept looking at his face and his eyes, that he had been caught. This was just a photograph that someone had taken his picture while he was doing this. And there's so much fear in his own face and his own eyes, like terror, like shocked that someone was videoing or taking this still. And you just wonder how far outside the circle someone is, or how powerful they feel in this web of a system that allows them to feel this way and treat another human this way. And so I keep thinking of so much fear in the officer's face, and it's making me question, exactly what has perpetuated this fear and continues this fear of other people.
Thank you. Ruth?
Okay. I have not seen the video. I purposely, intentionally not watching it. So I see the kind of the fragments, because I know when I see the posture, so I know what I'm gonna about to see. So I purposely not watching it. It's because if I knew if I watch it, it will stir up anger, and it will stir up something I maybe cannot control. So for my own mental health, and also, and one thing I will add, this kind of things, it's now getting caught up in the film, but those things happening, and they've been happening around us, close to us, even close home. And it's not only far away from big other states, even close home. And as little as you in the line in the market, you know, you have your money in your hand and you purchase and you have your own money, and that they still question you, your integrity, they question your color. And yes, that's why I intentionally not watching that video, but I read the narrative. And if I could change the narrative, I would. And that's why one thing I put in my notes, and I said, shift the perspective, shift it. When I say, that's why I put in my notes myself, shift the perspective. And it's not only, I don't see it like a skin deep. It's not only a officer who has the power. First of all, you are an officer, you already have an authority, and you take that authority beyond somebody's life. And that's why I shifted between identity and authority, because for me it's very, very skip deep.
Thank you. Al?
So I watched the whole video and it made me very, 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 very angry. The feelings that I felt was kind of a feeling of kind of sadness and just honest, like just total defeat, because like I'm looking at a situation where everybody just like stood there and they had no choice but to stand there because of the authority that the police have been given. They just stood there and they watched as a man was literally being murdered, and it was legal and it happened legally because it was a police officer that did that. So after watching that, I was very, very angry, and it just makes me feel so useless and scared every time I see a police officer, because I don't know if this police officer is going to handle it the way they're supposed to handle it. If this police officer is going to use their power correctly and not to take my life or to wrongly do their job. Like seeing George Floyd's death put it into perspective for me that in the game of life, I'm starting a little far back. That's what George Floyd did for me. He showed me that at the start of the race, I'm a little far back. That's what that video showed me.
Thank you, Al. Jeff?
Yes, thank you all for those really hard, open, and honest thoughts and feelings thus far. And just want to personally say I'm very sorry for how Al feels. So thank you for that, Al. I too watched, I think, the relevant parts of the video, the segments that were the ones I think, in my opinion, I think most people probably needed in some capacity to watch. I think we live in a world today where our realities have changed in the sense that we have opportunities to capture information, to see horrors, unspeakable things that happen every day to people, to our members of our Black community, to brown people, to minorities. And I think for too long, many of those things have gone on unwitnessed, different accounts. And the truth in the evidence and in the reality of having to face something, having to look something in the eye for what it is and not look away, right? Really digest what it is that you're seeing and how you feel about it, and do something, feel something, be compassionate, take action, be conscionable. I think it speaks to the point where we recently saw a similar horror with Ahmaud Arbery. And for too long, the justice system failed that family because it was just an incidence of someone said this, someone did that, and it was a known former police officer in the community, and no action was taken. Horribly, right? No action was taken for too long. But when the video surfaced, and you could call it, what do we call it here? We called it some kind of trauma porn, or whatever you want to call it, this mass media. When that surfaced, it gave everybody the chance to see for their own eyes what happened and the horror that took place for that young African-American man. And so justice was met in that case. We hope that comes to fruition. I know there have been things set in motion for that case as of yesterday, so that's good news for that family and for our entire country and the community. But I think these instances are really hard to deal with, and I aligned a lot with Principal Kohut's sentiment on that. I think they're very, very hard to deal with, but today we need to look them in the face in this time that we're in this movement that we have going on, and really embrace it and say it's time. It's time for everyone to do their part, to be responsible, because you've seen what happens. You've seen it. There's no more cover up. There's no more dialogue around what someone saw or thinks they saw. We know exactly what happened. And I think the very saddest case in watching that video is this sense of authority that this policeman had, the sense of we have, or I have a right to do this in some way, was just horrifying that man in that moment, wearing his gun with a group of people around him, had a sense that this was okay somehow. So I think we need to rethink a lot of authority given to policemen and think about the training involved in how to de-escalate and how to treat people like human beings that they are. So I think in all, seeing these videos and seeing these incidences are hard, extremely hard, harder for our African-American community, because this has been going on for far too long, and it probably brings up emotions and feelings and horrors that they've lived for too long. But if we all see it and we're all part of the solution, then I think in some way we all have to be better off for being better.
Thank you, Jeff. Tammy?
So I watched the video all the way through a couple times, honestly. And for me, every time I watched it, I was just like picking out a different thing. Like it was very painful for me. I had a lot of anger watching it. The first thing that honestly got to me in that video was looking at the second police officer, who, as everyone, people who have seen the video, he's another minority. He's an Asian man. And he's just standing there. Another minority is standing there while police officer is kneeling down, pressing his knee on this man's neck, and he's not doing anything about it. He's just letting it go. Thinking back, and then as he's yelling, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. I'm thinking back to Eric Garner. It's the irony of another Black man being killed by cops yelling out the same thing, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Thinking back a couple of days before this, in the Boys of Color, before that, like that happened, in the Boys of Color meeting, we literally were just talking about Ahmaud Arbery and what happened. Al can advocate for that. We were just talking about it. And the next meeting we had, the first thing Al said was, is this is really happening again? We literally just talked about this. Like, we can't go a week without someone being killed. Like, honestly, Alex, I agree with what you said, but I also have to agree with Dennis and Jeff in the fact that if these videos weren't out there, all these situations would have been swept under the rug easily. Like these videos circulated online are the only way justice has been able to been received for anyone. Ahmaud Arbery was killed on February 23rd. I personally, I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't hear anything about his death until I started seeing the videos online and watching the video, seeing that. And then the fact, to me, it makes me sick that it took that long for, like, even though it takes that long for the video to come out, it takes that long for them to even try to arrest the people that killed him. So like just stuff like that, just this reoccurring essence, thinking back, for me, especially like the time we're going through right now, I'm thinking back, I was Al's age when Trayvon Martin was killed. So like that, just like knowing that I was his age when that's happened, I'm 23 now, and honestly, not much has changed.
Thank you. Graham?
I almost want to pass because a lot of what I'd say has been covered. I agree with Temi and Jeffrey in the basic notion that it's important that these videos get out. There are way too many of them. At the same time, I don't judge anyone who chooses not to. I don't, that's a deeply personal choice, and you don't need to, subject yourself to that if it's too much. But I have watched the video of the murder of George Floyd through more than once. It definitely elicits feelings of real rage. But as Temi said, there was a video of Ahmaud Arbery being murdered, but there wasn't a video until it was publicized. It would have languished in a drawer somewhere, and we never would have known. And even back to Dennis, I was going to bring up the same comparison to Mamie Till, the mother of Emmett Till, making the decision to have an open casket because she knew it was important. And that was a mother that completely sacrificed. She re-traumatized herself by doing that. She could have, some of her pain would have been eased by not doing it that way. But she saw the importance of that. I don't really know why. I'm happy that it has, but I don't really know why the video of George Floyd's murder has spurred so many people to action. I'm happy that it did. I've been thinking about that. I speculate that it, maybe it has something to do with the pandemic and people are sheltering at home and slowed down a little bit and a little more thoughtful. There are, maybe it's a critical mass of incidents with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, then George Floyd. None of those explanations are really satisfactory to me. There are other subtle and profound differences between other, what we call similar cases. I'm not really sure why the same people that I've been around when a lot of other horrific cases of brutality have been publicized in a similar manner, were able to shake it off. Again, I'm glad that it's happening. I'm not sure why. I don't think people that have, anyone that's really hardened their heart against this may have been changed. I think the important thing that it's changed is there are people who were not racists who have, become anti-racists. And that's an important distinction. So yeah, I watched it. I've watched a lot of other of these. It's not enjoyment. I'm sure there are those for whom it is a sort of a trauma porn. I think it's just important, if there's going to be a change, that as a group, no individual needs to watch it, but they need to be widely disseminated in order to spur these type of changes.
Thank you. Melissa?
So going last, I'm going to probably mostly pick up on what other people have said. So as LaToya said, I haven't watched it because I don't think I need to watch it to feel what I feel. And also my choice not to watch it was based on a fear of what I would do with that horror and that shame that watching the video would provoke. I don't feel like I really have an outlet for it. I wouldn't know what to say. I wouldn't know what to do. I would feel helpless. And I didn't think that it would help me to watch it. But that being said, I've read a lot of the narratives and I've seen some of the still photos. I'm also really struck by the fact that he was calling out for his dead mother, as Peter said, because he knew he was dying. And that as a mother, I feel like every mother in the world who's read about that or seen it that just kind of struck straight into the depths of my soul, I have to say. And also I wanted to pick up on what Dennis was saying and Holly about the expression on that officer's face and his body position. I agree with Holly that there was something in his eyes, but his body was so casual, like his just the way he held his body. It was like he was just kneeling like at the gym, or I don't know, like just I can't imagine how a person could be in the act of murdering someone and be that physically calm. Like that just I don't know what to do with that. So the other reaction that I had when this happened and when I was reading about it and looking at the pictures, I just kept thinking of all those names of all these cases that have come before that have been publicized over the last few years. And by the way, I agree that the only reason that we're finally able to talk about this and bring some justice is because we have the videos. So I do agree that they're important. They need to be out there. They need to be circulated. But I was thinking, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, this litany of just, and I think Al is right when he said it feels like we can't even go a week without, somebody being killed. And why is it that suddenly this, struck a chord in our society? I'm very glad that it has. And I wanted to kind of go back to my weather report because all of these names and all of these people who have been murdered, it's like, just, it leaves me with a feeling of defeat, a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, and just a dark cloud over our country and our society. But now I feel like maybe there's just a ray of sunshine that's piercing those clouds, that we're all here tonight having this conversation. And hopefully it's just one of many conversations that we're going to continue to have as a community, as a society, as a school. So that feels like a little ray of light piercing through those clouds.
Thank you, Melissa. So Colleen, if you would like to see if anybody on the panel has their hand up to respond to another panelist, while she's checking that, I want to thank you all for sharing your answers to this first round. And Al, I have to say, you are amazing, and thank you for being so raw and so vulnerable and so honest. And as your former teacher, it makes me really happy to see that you feel safe enough to do that with us, and I just want to thank you for that. So Colleen, if you want to take over for hands, if there are any hands that are up before we take a break.
Yeah, currently we do not have any hands raised. I do want to just remind the attendees that are viewing this as well that the hand raise option for attendees is not there, as we previously sent out the form for people to ask questions. But I do see that Temmie's hand has been raised. So Temmie.
I just want to piggyback on what Julie said. Honestly, Al, hearing you talk, like I've resonated with that on a personal level, and just like seeing how you've grown since I've been at Swampscott, the way you talk, the way you present yourself, and the way you're able to be vocal about how you feel nowadays, I'm really proud of you, honestly.
thank both of you.
So if we do not have any hands raised, we can take a quick break, as I know we've been discussing for an hour. Oh, Peter, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks. I just wish the Zoom audience could see what we see, and to see LaToya's response
Mhm.
to Al and Temi and Mater and Alex. And last night I heard snapping at certain times during her forum, and it took me a while to figure out where it was coming from. She's doing it now. So I wish Zoom would allow us to just literally have a live shot of LaToya during this, because that is like so hopeful to me. Just that love and the passion that LaToya showed last night and she's showing tonight. So I just wanted, since Zoom can't see what we can see, I just wanted to tell her how much I loved it.
Go ahead, LaToya.
I love them. and for me to be a Metco director in Swampscott means so many things, like especially for Al, I get to see them come all the way up. And for right now, like in my professional career, there's no greater joy than seeing the evolution of a young person. So Al, you know I stand, and I'm very, very proud of you.
Thank you, LaToya. Anybody else want to share? So I want to thank everyone for sharing in that round. As I did see, I know, Peter, you made reference to not necessarily being able to see what we all see, but the facial expressions and the emotions that you see from people's eyes and faces when just each of you responded is incredible. So I want to thank every single one of you for the rawness of what you're sharing with us and the trust and vulnerability that you have with us. So thank you, as we appreciate each and every one of you. And LaToya, to the snap to you, your heart's there, I appreciate you. So we'll take a quick 10-minute break, if that sounds good for everyone. I just want, as you are looking at the screen, I just want to reference to all the artwork that you're seeing in this presentation has been created by Swampscott High School students. So when you receive the community newsletter we put out, that was a Swampscott student who created that as well. These are all from Erin Grocky's art class. So I want to thank the artists as well who've contributed to this slide and allowed for us to just look and reflect while we're having a break on what our students are saying just through art rather than through voice. Thank you.
All right, Colleen, I think we are good. If everybody wants to come on back and we can start our second round. So just so you know, all of you are muted right now. And so when it's your turn to speak, just make sure you're unmuting yourselves or we can unmute you. And Colleen, do you want to update what we discussed during the break?
Sure. So just a little bit of feedback while we were on break. And I think people are really enjoying this conversation. And like I think we had said at the beginning of this, we want to make sure that we're getting 100% of everybody. So what Julie and I decided is we might shift the direction of this. And since we originally had 3 rounds planned for this evening, we'll do a round 1 and round 2 this evening and have Julie close that out. And then what our plan will be is, now that we've had the community, we had about 70 viewers at one point today. So now the community was able to view this and see, they'll be able to access the Google document as well. What we'll do is we'll plan a follow-up session of this and have round 3 and the community questions answered, if that sounds good, so that we're not, 3 hours is a long time to go. And I know, like I said, I want to be aware of those that participated in the town's discussion last night, as well as everybody's time just in general. So if that works with everybody, I think that's the route that we're going to go, is that we'll do the round 2, we'll close out, and then what we'll do is send a follow-up to the community and obviously to our panelists as well with the next day. I would love to be able to have it next Thursday, but the panelists will discuss that offline to see if that works for us. And I think, Julie, you're going to change the view as well for the attendees, as some of the feedback that we received were wanting to see what Peter spoke of as the reaction and myself spoke of the reaction of the other panelists on this.
Thank you, Peter.
So that'll be that. I think as well, we'll make another little change in after we're doing the round 2 question, and before we go to the closing poem that Julie has prepared, I would like us to just do a closing round in general to remind all of the attendees who you are and why you participated in this. And maybe that does actually change from your original purpose that we shared out to the community, which is why we didn't do that at the beginning of that, since we shared that document out. But I think it might be great to just remind everyone who you are and why you're here. And then also make sure that names and positions, etc., are correct and appropriate. Okay, so if we're ready to start, Julie, I'll let you begin with round 2.
So I'm hoping those who are attendees can see a different view now. I don't have my chat up, so I can't, or we don't even have chat enabled, but any feedback somehow, if you could just even send me an email or something, I can just look quickly. But yeah, so I would love to hear from attendees who are watching if you guys can see the other participants as they're speaking. So let's get into second round. And so for this first question, many would agree that violence is not the answer to violence. So for this next question, I do really want to make an emphasis on stating that the vast majorities of protests that have happened around the country and the demonstrations have been very, very peaceful. But there is a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., to which some people have been referring in wake of some recent street actions that have turned violent. And that quote is a riot is the language of the unheard. So with that said, if you've seen that, or if you've seen any of the footage of some of the arson, looting, and rioting, why do you think this is happening? So that's our second round question, is why do you think this is happening, or why has it happened in the past few weeks? Why have these demonstrations turned violent seemingly when the sun goes down? So that's our second round question. We are going to start at the letter F. So Holly Flanagan, you are up first. And you are there you go. Now you're unmuted.
So I'm here, I'm showing up because there's so much work to do, because I have so much learning and unlearning to do. I'm here because I believe in the restorative dialogue. I am not a historian. I'm not a political analyst. And so I have many gaps in my answer. But I think because we're all here, we know that this is systemic and intersectional, that it is happening because voices are powerless and have not been heard. And forgive me, I'm plagiarizing. I remember seeing a quote, something about it is not the moral responsibility or right of the oppressors to tell the oppressed what to do with their anger. And so I've really appreciated Kendi's discussion of demonstration versus protest in educating me, and really talking about all of the semantics of language, and about talking about riots as language, talking just about language and system and policies. So this is happening because of racist policy, because of, we could list 10 things, because of imperialism, because of slavery, because Reconstruction failed, because of Jim Crow laws, because of housing, because of inequity in food access and healthcare, and so it's intersectional, and it's anger that is justified, and there's huge debates about person over property, but I think until we acknowledge that we are breathing racist air, even if we're nice and kind and well-intentioned, that we are born into a racist system in the US, and that we're all harmed by it. But it is It's the anger of someone like myself, a white woman, a white mother right now, but it's not new, right? It's new to our conversation. So if we're angry about misogyny and we're aware of that, and every day as a feminist, I'm aware and sort of rechecking myself in terms of how I see women's health and wellness and image. And I'm saying, oh, wait, but that's a patriarchal lens or a misogynist lens. And I want to reshape and re-see, I think Ruth said, shift perspective. Then I need to see that intersection of misogyny and classism and racism and transphobia and homophobia and all of those. It's all the same. It's a web. And so it's happening because we have not made the progress. We've not shifted the perspective. And we've not been agents of change as we should have. I feel strongly about this answer. So I just want to end with this. I think especially in our community, our suburban community, our population in our school, that most of our panelists as white individuals, this is where we educate and we really learn and really show up beyond peace and love. My answer was that I am an advocate of love over fear. I'm an advocate of my students who are Black and brown. No one in my classroom is illegal, but I have to do more. So for me, more than having a sign on my classroom, it's, for example, coming to Circle and pulling those voices up and making active changes that way. But we have to take action. And the white silence is, I think, as Martin Luther King Jr. had said, his greatest concern, that those who would prefer to live in peace and not want to feel this discomfort and tension, that is the greatest, that is what's perpetuating the continued problem. I'm sorry the answer was too long, but it's just so loaded and so important. So.
Great answer, Holly. Thank you. Dennis.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of reasons why, but I did go back and I did find that Dr. King quote on the internet. It's from, he used it twice, but the first time it was in an interview with Mike Wallace, 1966. And later on in that sentence, or in that paragraph, I should say, and I'm paraphrasing him, he says, yeah, economic plight has worsened for the African-American community. So that's 1966. And we know, right, where we look at income inequality in the United States, right, it does fall along those lines, right? And I think that's part of this. And I think COVID obviously is deepening economic woes across the country. And we know it's hitting the African-American community particularly hard. And it just, as someone who's an educator, it makes me think that we know that there's this achievement gap among students, right, nationwide, and in some places it's worse. And I think we really need to finally do a better job as a country of addressing that. And it's a little discouraging to know that, I don't know, maybe I missed something, but in the current sort of political campaign that's going on nationally, I haven't heard either major candidate talk about education, right? I don't remember that in 2016. And I think we know that's the driver, right, for people to have opportunity. And I think it kind of goes back to what Al said, that idea of probably people feeling like at the start of the race, I'm far back. I'm paraphrasing you as well, Al, but I think that's what you said. And that's that notion, that feeling of sort of seeing a lack of opportunity and then seeing this terrifying murder happen. And I think part of this conversation not only will be about the issues surrounding obviously law enforcement, but also I think there's a component of this where we have to address the achievement gap nationally, right? And the way that we approach education in this country.
Thanks, Dennis. Ron. I'm gonna unmute you. Ron, you're still muted.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I was certainly aware of the protests and those that were involved looting and destructive behavior. It was alarming from a police perspective, but I get it. I understand, it really stems from years of pent up frustration, and it's an expression of anger and just dissatisfaction with the lack of progress with respect to race relations, and the existence of systematic racism in society. I'm old enough that I remember the civil rights movement, and I was a boy, but I remember worried watching on TV as riots occurred, but I'm really surprised and discouraged that there hasn't been more progress over the years, over the decades, the intervening decades. I've been encouraged at times when there was a Black president elected. So in recent years, I've seen, as everyone has, a more divisive time, and I think that has contributed to the situation we're in now, where relationships with race are, systematic racism is worse than ever. I'm also acutely aware of the role police play in all of this, and historically, in some form or another, even before there were police, there was some form of police in history that is a tool of oppression of people of color and Black people. I know that in the 60s there was, during the Freedom Riders and the atrocities that occurred during that time were at times really openly related to police departments, and either through lack of protecting people or actively involved. So being somewhat aware of the history of policing generally, I've been hopeful. I thought we were moving in a direction that was progressive and moving in a positive way. So I'm discouraged currently by the current state of affairs, but I'm also encouraged by peaceful protests I've observed, and I see, as the question references, the majority of protests are peaceful. I've been inspired by what's going on in Swampscott, and was happy to participate actively in one, and also to be present and talk with organizers in a couple of subsequent protests. So I'm encouraged. I think it's important to keep those going, and recognize that our police department stands together and with those groups that are protesting police brutality and standing in opposition against racism.
Thank you. Chris?
So I found it really interesting for Martin Luther King to use the word riot. It just seemed out of place for everything I think of that comes to mind when I think about him. Because we could just as easily call this a rebellion, and it has a different connotation to it. To me, riot equals violence, and rebellion equals righteousness, right? So like it's interesting that the word riot is being attached to this. And I think Chief Madigan, you just said that protest is peaceful, right? So like it just makes me think about the words we use, or maybe more specifically, the people who are telling the stories and the words they use. And I think about, for the last month or so, every time I wake up in the morning, I pour my coffee and I sit down and I turn on the news, and I think about who owns the media corporations that are telling me these stories, and it's white people, rich white people, and they have advertisements they need to sell. So the stories are going to be crafted in a way that makes them happy. So, you know, you hear the headlines after George Floyd's murder that protests turned violent, right? And it's just like, well, I also see images from civilians where it's a peaceful protest with people just standing there silently, and then the police come around the corner wearing full body armor and shields and then toss canisters into the crowd. And it's like, wait, did the protesters make that violent, or did the police make it violent? And it's just like, who's telling this story? You know, and I don't know. So that's what I think. And then, you know, why do I think looting is happening? I think it's a combination of, you probably have some opportunistic people out there who are not necessarily protesting racial injustice, that they're out there to, you know, be anarchists and promote chaos, and are just using this as an opportunity. Then I take a step back, but I also imagine that, like, the confluence of forces with the pandemic, that perhaps there are people in desperation. So it's an opportunity for someone who's been desperate to maybe change their circumstance. And then I also, like, I put my Dean of Students hat on, that, you know, that there's something behind the behavior, and then perhaps, you know, this type of behavior gets more attention, right? It's staying in the media, and it's staying on the forefront of conversation. So, you know, I don't know. That's what I think.
Okay. Temi, I see you have your hand raised, but we will wait till the end if you want to hold that thought. Up next, Latoya.
So now everybody can see, like, on the grid reactions. I saw Temi, I saw Al, Chris. I mean, everything you said was what I had. And just thank you. I do want to discuss a little bit about agitators and how they're similar to strike breakers, and how they are literally paid to come in and mess stuff up, make it violent, make it something that the media will pay attention to. Recently, Boston Police Department was recorded taking bricks out of the back of a truck and placing them in certain areas in Boston. They were also recorded destroying their own police cruisers. And if we want to talk about videos, if we want to talk about media, even just going back to that first question, what are you going to believe? What are you going to do with the information that's being presented to you? I agree with the sentiments of people over property. This is human life. And at one time in this country, Black bodies were property. Things can be replaced. Human lives cannot be replaced. I said it last night and I'll say it again. This country was not founded or formed or imperialized peacefully. Why will the change that is necessary be any different? Why would it be peaceful under the atrocious acts that have been committed to people who are looked at as less than? Indigenous people, Black bodies, LGBTQ. This change that's happening is a result of generations of atrocities. So if you're afraid of things being stolen, what does that really say about what you think about what's going on in the world? Chris said it, and I'll say it again, the protesters are met with violence. It's like, so for some places, for some people that I've talked to in different cities, different states, even close to home, they come prepared. Gallons of milk for pepper spray. There are whole guidelines or tips, hacks to doing this. The person in the White House declared military action on the citizens of his country. And the last thing I'll say is Kimberly Jones. Look her up, because I don't want to misrepresent what she has said. That's everyone's homework. Look up Kimberly Jones. I'm sure it's on YouTube, or if you put it on Instagram or Twitter, it'll come up. Look up her words. It's about 7 minutes, and it's really important. And I think it answers this question perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, LaToya. Alex?
I agree completely with what LaToya, Mr. Norkin, and Ms. Flanagan said. I think that coming from my perspective, you can never, as like a white person, you can never judge the people who are being oppressed. And one thing that I think can be done is to, as like a white person, especially in this town, you have the resources and access to resources to educate yourself about this topic, about racism, about systemic racism. And I think that, I know I'll be doing that this summer, that I think that's one way that this issue can be combated along with external legislation. But I also think that when a white person educates themselves, they must understand that a Black person doesn't like owe it to them to educate them about racism, because it does bring up trauma, it does bring up all these things that they have to deal with on a daily basis. And I think that it's important to, when you educate yourself, to amplify the voices of Black activists and to just, yeah, that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Alex. Peter?
In the multitude of conversations in recent weeks, I was talking to someone who remembers taking to the streets in the 1960s and thinking as though they left the 60s fixing the problem, only to get to the 80s and realize that really just what happened is that we institutionalized the problem and marbleized the problem in our society. This morning, I had a chance to sit, thanks to Chief Madigan, and be invited to sit with a group of police officers together with one of my colleagues, and to just talk about what's happening in society and to share views and perspective. And Chief Madigan shared a letter that was undated that talked about an incident where there was an individual using some rather strong racially charged comments towards someone else. And it was a letter praising the officer and how the officer handled it. And it was a computer generated letter. And we oftentimes, the chief is nice enough to share commendations from the public with us to show the good work of our officers. And so I assume this was a 2020 letter, because it totally was appropriate. It was thematic. It was right on topic because we're seeing it today. And the chief told us it was about him in 1994 when he was a patrolman, I assume at that point, or a much younger officer. And it read as though it was written today, which was another reminder of how things haven't changed, which was remarkable for me, that I didn't for a second think it was anything but today when he showed us the letter. And so it really speaks to me about not being heard and how long people haven't been heard. And so what I'm trying to do is to find out how we can not get distracted by people when they say, well, look at the violence, or look at the disrespect for one group or another, at the expense, though, of us getting to the conversation that really is where we need to focus, which is how do we change the system and cure injustice and cure inequality? Because I think a lot of people are using, unfortunately, violence or property damage as an excuse to not get to the conversations of injustice and inequality. I gotta tell you, I left the conversation really hopeful today with the 9 members of the Swampscott Police, because they all said they wish they were involved last night in our conversation. And they all said they want to be involved in the conversation. And they all said that they want to sit next to those that criticize them. And it's hard for them to hear, but all of them wanted to be part of the dialogue. And I don't know the answer, but I do know, I believe in my heart that the answer is when everybody wants to sit down and have the conversations, as opposed to just stay separate and complain about the other. And so I'm hopeful about it, and really grateful for that.
Thank you, Peter. Mater?
So I think these riots, as I'm sure everyone realizes, I think people are tired. You know, I'm tired, and George Floyd certainly wasn't the first victim of a racially biased incident of police brutality, and he certainly won't be the last. I mean, there's been a couple victims after him that haven't really garnered as much attention as he has. And these riots are a result of the anger of not being the first generation to be fighting these issues. As someone said earlier, this, didn't end when the civil rights movement ended. It's been going on since the beginning of America's foundation. And I've seen a lot of people condemn the rioting as, oh, look, this isn't helping your cause. This is just like not relevant to the movement. But so often those same people are the ones that were silent when the video of George Floyd came out. And it makes me angry to see that they're more angry and pissed off about the rioting more than they are about the murder of a human being. They're more angry about stores being looted over an innocent human being killed by a police officer who abused his power and sat on a human being for over 8 minutes and killed him. And it wasn't, a misjudgment, because those can happen. Wasn't like he accidentally fired his gun or something. He was 100% aware of what he was doing. And so were the 3 other police officers with him. And they knew they were being recorded, and they still did it because they knew that, or they expected the system to protect them. And I think the quote that was brought up by Martin Luther King, writing is the language is unheard, is very true today, because people of color have been unheard and they've been silenced as long as they've been in this country, since this country's founding. And I think that's why the rioting started, because they're tired of always being silenced, always being treated as less than their white counterparts. And I don't think it's fair for people to say that there were rioters that weren't actually part of the movement, and I don't agree with that because they're just tarnishing the name of the movement for, you know, no reason. But the Black people or the people of color who were actually rioting because they were angry with the situation of this country, which everyone should be, I don't think it's fair to tell them how they should be like reacting, because not everyone understands how that feels. Not like white people don't understand what they're going through, what we're going through. And it's just kind of saddening and disheartening to hear some people dismiss the movement because they don't agree 100% with its methods, because that's not the heart of the movement. The heart of the movement is to gain equality in this country, and not everyone always has to like the way things are being done, because we all have the same end goal, hopefully. Yeah.
Thanks, Mater. Melissa?
Sorry. So I just want to pick up on what Mater and a few other people had said about like the rioting, the quote unquote rioting and the looting. I think it gives people who don't want to do the hard work of examining what's happening in our society and, you know, our institutional systems that have existed for 400 years, it gives them a really easy out to just say, you know what, those people are violent, and you know what, I don't want to talk about this. Like, that's where it begins and ends for me. And then they just kind of go on their merry way and things just stay the way that they are. So I think that in that respect, it's a shame that there are, you know, maybe some opportunistic, like Mr. Norkin was saying, some opportunistic people, people who thrive on chaos and want to, you know, bring attention to themselves, create, you know, create chaos. But on the other hand, I think it's important. I mean, I think it's an expression of one of the things I was actually reading up about this and about, you know, why people riot and loot, et cetera. And one of the things that I read about was that people most often are attacking authority, like symbols of authority, like maybe like, for example, a police car, or for example, the CNN offices in Atlanta, or, you know, it could also be just out of a sense of frustration of the scales not being balanced. And it's sort of an effort to, you know, maybe people haven't had access to certain things in society and they're frustrated about that. So this is like a way to, you know, balance those scales, which have not been balanced for 400 years. The other thing that I wanted to mention was just going back to what Mr. Norkin said about language. I think language is really important. And in so many news articles that I've read, when they're talking about, you know, white people, it's always protesters, but when they're talking about people of color, it's rioters or looters or thugs. And Latoya mentioned, you know, the man in the White House is currently using that kind of language. He's talking about law and order and keeps tweeting about law and order. And to me, that's just such an old fashioned, simplistic, reductive way to look at things. It's such a binary way to look at things. And I think to myself, when I hear those two words, law and order, I think, you know, are we really going back to the 60s? Are we really going back to Nixon? But I guess we kind of are, because we never really solved the problems. They just became, as someone else mentioned, they just became institutionalized. So yes, I guess we are going back to the 60s and even beyond the 60s, because these problems are, they've never been resolved. And so finally here we have an opportunity to really do the hard work, think about things, look at things, examine ourselves, try to be better. So, you know, if there is a positive aspect to that, I guess that's what it would be.
Thank you. Graham?
So I guess right up front, I'd say, yes, there are some opportunists, I'm sure, in these large demonstrations that do some damage. There are also people that are not committed to a cause, that are, you know, just taking the opportunity to, you know, perform actions that they otherwise, you know, they definitely shouldn't. But every time I hear this question, it always takes me back a little bit. I think it should basically just be flipped upside down. Why wouldn't there be property damage in a population of people when everything else has been taken away from them? Why isn't there more of it? And again, on an individual basis, I don't condone it. You know, it's if you know that was going on outside of my door, I'd stand in the doorway to keep my 18-year-old from going out there. But looking at it from a broader lens, why would we not expect more of that? People that, you know, have experience worse health outcomes, they have they have less educational opportunities, less employment opportunities, or poorer housing opportunities. It's surprising to me that these things don't happen until basically the last thing left is taken and threatened to be taken from people, their lives. There aren't, when we get reports of, educational disparities, or, other reports come out, there's lots of statistics that can really drag you down. But none of that creates the conditions for rioting or looting or property damage. So that's what I have to say is the question's always puzzled me. And I definitely would echo what Madhur said. The people that when people will become just completely outraged at, someone looting an auto parts store, but they shook off casually a person being murdered. There's just, their skills are out of whack. So that's what I'd have to say about that. I think the question is kind of upside down.
Thank you. Temi, I can't see you. I don't know if you're there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I think this is honestly my Wi-Fi just bugging again because I can't see anyone else.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, all right. So how I feel about this question, I'm just gonna give a couple experiences that happened during the protest times. So the Saturday, the first protest, the one that got violent in Boston, I had a lot of friends that went to that. I went back home to Springfield that day. And that night I'm watching Snapchats and I'm talking to one of my friends. And apparently the police had shut down all the train stations that were near the protest sites. They'd box people in. They wouldn't let people go down certain train exits. They had to you had to walk to the farthest one. And I believe that because the next day when I went to a protest, they shut down the one that was closest to us and made us walk a couple miles down the road. And the protest ended around 6:00, but there was a 9:00 curfew during that time in Boston. So I remember one of the people that set up the protest went up and said, all right, we all have to get around here by 7:00 or else they threaten to use real bullets on us. And I go, what? And that honestly, that set me off. I was honestly starting to get irritated throughout the day, just walking through protests and seeing all the military personnel throughout the streets, seeing all that. I'm like, it's not necessary. That is what, it's a slippery slope. People act out for a certain reason. The riot that broke out on that Saturday in Boston, that happened because the police instigated and they fed the people. They wanted something to happen and they got what they wanted, honestly. A lot of the rioting is, I believe, is out of frustration. People are tired. Like I said, I was Al's age when Trayvon Martin got shot. For our generation, that's like the beginning of like, for like me at least, like being aware, being like self-aware, that was the beginning of the slippery slope of like, dang, this country is really like not doing much for us. And like that frustration, like there's a lot of people that have been carrying that frustration with them from back then. Everyone has been killed since. And like, I believe there are people that they're justified rioting going on, but at the same time, there are those people, like Chris said, those opportunists that just, they notice something, they know there's their chance, they take advantage of it. Those that, they're in the cases of white people that aren't for the Black Lives Matter movement, going into these protests and inciting the violence and causing them, creating them. So honestly, I agree with the quote. Riots are a way for like those that are unheard to like just to have their voice be out there. Honestly, this country was built on riots. Like this country was built on rebellion.
Thanks, Tommy. Al?
We have Jeff too. I think we went out of order, right?
Yeah, Al, Jeff, and then Ruth. Al, are you there?
I first like to start it off with a quote from my guy, Malcolm X. He said, "You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has freedom." I'm kind of gonna go in a different. I'm gonna go in a. So tell me, my cousin was at the protest too, and he was at the protest, not the riots. But because the subways were shut off, we couldn't go home. My cousin got shot 3 times, one in his forehead by rubber bullets. And he wasn't there rioting. He was there protesting, but he couldn't get home. He couldn't get home because they shut down the subways, as Timmy just said. It's really disheartening if you guys really want the truth. My cousin was shot 3 times. He got shot once in his forehead and twice in his thighs. And he wasn't a rioter. He's not a rioter. He's 14. He's 14 years of age, and he was shot because he couldn't get home. Because, bro, you got them walking 2-3 miles on some. Let me get back to the question. At first, I didn't really believe in rioting, and I didn't support it at all because something about me is when I grow up, I no longer want to be a surgeon, as I told some people. I want to be an entrepreneur, and I want to build up my businesses. So I understand the idea and
Oops. Al, you have lost your audio. Try again.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I understand the ideology of entrepreneurship. So I originally didn't support the idea of rioting, but my cousin got shot 3 times for no reason. And my family is a very peaceful family. Like, it's like Latoya can support, like, my mom is a very peaceful woman. Like, she's very peaceful. Like, God bless, like, we're all peaceful. It's not, nobody, rioting is not like, nobody said rioting was good, but you have to look at what is happening in the, look. Would you be mad at my cousin if he went to a riot? He got shot 3 times? Would you be mad at him? He got shot for no reason? He was trying to go home. He was trying to go home, but the subway, look at Timmy said it. So I'm not even, like, literally he just finished talking. They literally closed the subway so the people couldn't go home. Would you be mad at him if he goes to a riot now? Like, that's why like it's such a, you just have to see and understand the views of everybody in the situation. That's honestly how I just know some people were treated unfairly, and that it's not.
Al, your audio went out again.
Oh my God, all y'all are freezing. I don't even know if y'all can hear me.
I can, yeah, we can hear you.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Holy crap, yo. I'm just talking for no reason.
Watch your mouth, boy.
Al, we can hear you.
Hello?
Al, can you hear us? I think we just lost him. Okay, so hopefully he'll get back on here. Jeff, you're up next.
Wait, can you guys hear? Can you guys hear this?
Yeah, bro. I just lagged out. I'm not even done talking. I'm done talking.
No, keep talking. Can you guys hear him through this?
Temmie, if you want to tell him to come back on, we'll circle back at the end to him, okay?
No.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, so I just want people to understand that like it's really like not it's not a black and white thing. Like this is the voice of millions of people that have just been treated unfairly. This is just the voice of a million people. And the reaction that they're receiving has caused them to take action in a different way, or a way that people didn't like. That's what I think.
All right, thank you. Jeff.
Wow. Okay. I get to go pretty near the end, and I have to say that this round has been really insightful. I've enjoyed everyone's commentary around their perspectives and opinions. I appreciate Al and Temmie's firsthand experience and description of sort of how those things are in reality, those protests and demonstrations, and how they can become things that we don't perceive they are, or people don't portray that they are. I really agree wholeheartedly with a lot of things that were already said. I really very much enjoyed listening to those perspectives. I would offer something very similar in that if we just simply boil it down to something very granular and ask, why are so many people so angry? What has got us there? What's the culmination of the reality of why people act and protest and loot? More so loot and violence than the peaceful protesting, but what is it that's brought us to that point? And we have to grasp and wrestle with that in our very own ways, and we all have, I think, a similar opinion and a similar outlook on what it is that people are trying to achieve. It's the voice of the unheard. It is the giving power to the powerless. And I think this goes well beyond just recent acts that we've witnessed over video and different outlets of media, but it speaks to the systematic problem that we've faced and haven't fixed for so many years and for so long. So I agree very much with Chief Graham and his comments about why this didn't happen. Of course, I think we would expect as a society that it would happen. And I think if we look inward and listen and try to be sensitive to the things that we don't understand because we need to, we have to understand that there needs to be an understanding and forgiveness, I think, to some extent in that. And I'm not saying that violence is okay, and I'm not saying that crime is okay. I'm not saying anyone being hurt or losing property is okay. But I think there is a point that becomes a tipping point when there's no other outlet mechanism to have change happen, to have a voice for the voiceless people in many ways. So I was also disappointed that some of the spin put on this was more about the crime and the looting and the people that were potentially there capitalizing on situations that they weren't maybe entirely behind, that being the protests and the demonstrations. But I think it's very important to understand what got us there and to have some patience and some real dialogue and change in how we prevent people from feeling like that, feeling that anger and that helplessness, and that powerlessness and that fear, right? If Al's family member is at a protest, this young boy is 14 and he gets hit with rubber bullets. And it's inexcusable on every level, and it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening, right? That these things happen to people who are there for peaceful reasons, standing up for a cause that we all need to stand up for. So I hope that in where we are now, that people look at these protests and what has happened and really put a plan together, and we can figure out how we can all be part of a solution, which leads to some legislation that will make this better, that will slowly begin to heal and do justice and right by everyone who deserves it. So I appreciate everyone's comments. LaToya, I'm going to read that Kimberly Jones piece. Thank you for that. And Peter, I was happy to hear about some of the conversations between the police department too, because I think in our town, at least, if we can start small and expand, I think it's encouraging and hopeful that those conversations are happening and they're positive and they have some tangible outcome. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And Ruth.
Wow, last. Okay. This to that questions actually I have written out, but I know most of you already say a lot about it. Let me say by why do you think this is happening? How do you explain the recent incident as arson, looting, and rioting? Riots has been there. Now riot become violence, but riot was actually back 400 years ago. It's an expression. And that expression to tell you that you have been taking so much from me, it has to stop. And the only way you can literally, the only way the other side can come close to pain is the expression of riot. Now riot become violence. Riot was never been violence before. Riot is the expression. Like for example, you had this store that you always go. This is where you buy your food off, but this is where they've been taking your money. But this is the same place that be treating you so bad. This is the same place that you don't even feel safe to go. And then there you came and you can see riot is a place like one by one. They select exactly where to go. And that's why the media are not telling you the story. They narrative their own story to tell you how bad you've been. But if they forget to say what is the story behind this store? Why you also name this department of police, but not that one. The one that's been projecting justice, they're not touching that one, but the one that's been really taken away from people, that's the one. And it is an expression. And I want people really separate riots from violence, because it's two different things. It's not, and that's why we can see Martin Luther King Jr. said riot in expression of unheard, because it was never been a violence before, and it's now people associate with violence. with what Jeff just said, opportunities. People will come, okay, when the rioter make the action, and then the opportunities scoop in and then take it, like, you know, just profit from it. But the rioter doesn't need anything from that store. He doesn't need anything from that department because he's just mad. And I can stand at the corner with my bulletins in my hands for a month. You will pass on and not saying anything. I will go to the same store paying the same $5 of milk on that neighborhood when I know for sure if I go to the next neighborhood, I will pay it for $3. And that's expression. And I want the narrative to people to be really know about this. And I'm not really for riots, especially looting. I don't like looting. And because people taking where it's not supposed to, but riot is an expression of you have been taking so much from me. You've been pressing that button for so long. Now I'm exploding to you to let you know this has been happening to me. And this is the closest to the pain. It's not even the pain, this is the closest to it that you can feel. If I can make you feel where you been profiting from me, all my money, my education being out, you out resources, everything I have. If this is the way I can express that you've been oppressed me, and this is riot. And that's why I'm really, if I can, for the media to really say the narrative, not, oh, they've been pushing down that store, they've been killing, burning down their neighborhood. That's not even their neighborhood, because they don't even own an house in it. They don't even own anything. So this is why I want people to really deep down on this story. And the last thing I would have said is a plan of action. I love Swampscott. My son in love with Swampscott. Because of him, I don't mind wake up every 5:30 in the morning to make sure he's on the bus to be there. But one thing I told him, as a young boy, when you're a boy, you're cute. You're very cute. You're very interesting. But when you become a Black man, the stereotype staring at your face. And I want that stereotype for every kids, every Medco kids, every minorities, every person of color, brown, white, yellow, can feel like we are the same people. We are the same people. And I don't feel threatened by the colors, because I never emphasize on the colors. My son being in a biracial school since he was in kindergarten, he can look at you in your eyes. He doesn't feel threatened by whatever the colors, because we never speak about colors, but we always speak about human. And I want that to be really emphasized in Swampscott. I want him to speak about each one of us as human and raise them as a very successful, every potential successful young man and young woman at Swampscott. And this is the plan of actions. And I really want them, this moment, can we shape the education? And thank you.
Thank you so much. I am going to open it up if anybody wants to raise their hand. Al, I see you raised your hand, so you can speak, and then Temi, you will be up next.
I have a question for the police chief, Officer Ron. I know you spoke a little while ago, but I would just like your clear statement on how you feel about the looting and rioting as the chief of police and not as a regular human. I just want to understand how I want to see the police's side basically, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Sure. We've been fortunate that we haven't been faced with any situations like that here in Swampscott. We've had a number of protests that began at some point in the early days of the COVID epidemic and the restrictions that were put into place with respect to staying at home and wearing masks and steps that we as a community took to to keep people safe and to put restrictions and to limit the way people interacted, with really a focus on people staying at home. That created a lot of pushback at some point from certain groups. And at times we anticipated large groups. So we became adept with as far as preparing for such events. I can say that we became more comfortable with events generally because we really focused on keeping events safe, or rallies safe, or protests safe, demonstrations safe. And to the extent that we had any concerns, it typically involved counter protests and people that may have come to instigate conflict. So, just being aware of protests in other parts of the country that became volatile and exploded in conflict, or became, in the most dramatic cases where people drove into crowds and, the people were hurt or killed. We took steps and really focused on staying back and just ensuring that we created a safe environment in support of protests, in support of people exercising their right to, exercise the civil liberties and assemble and protest. And to be honest with you, it was tricky at times because sometimes we were pushing the envelope where it bumped up against our interest in keeping people separate and safe and protected, and balancing that with the concerns about the spread of COVID. Most recently, we've been fortunate to have some rallies, I would call them, or protests around the Black Lives Matter movement, and they've been peaceful. So I worry about safety. I worry about protecting not only the protesters, but the public. But a lot of our focus has been on keeping the protesters safe, frankly, because we're aware that people may come in from other places to try to instigate conflict. So it's with an eye towards safety that we really direct our attention, and always ensuring that people have a right to protest and have their message heard. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, you answered my question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Temi, I think you're up next.
I just want to piggyback off what Ruth was saying, honestly, about just riots compared to violence, and just putting like everything that's going on right now just in the perspective. One thing that like we all growing up, we all learn about, we've all been taught about, we all like, when people talk about it, it was a great revolutionary like thing that Americans did against the British, and that's the Boston Tea Party. That was a riot. It was a riot. They didn't steal anything. They were tired of being oppressed. They're tired of being taxed. They're tired of being taxed over and over again. They went out, they threw all the tea over the harbor. It's the same concept. Us Black people, like, we're tired of being oppressed. We're tired of like listen to Ruth say the things she says to her son is the exact same thing my mom has said to me growing up. Being a young Black boy, like, and I guarantee you, she's definitely also told her son, like, things that, like, when you go into a store, make sure you don't have your backpack on, make sure your hands are not in your pocket, take your hood off, things like that. Just like having to constantly like think about that and grow up with that And then when you are grown, seeing people just like you getting killed for no reason, getting mistreated for no reason, that is going to build the frustration. And like just piggybacking off what Ruth said, it is just the right is just like we just want to be we want to be treated fairly. That's to say.
Thank you, Tommy. I think
I think Matter's up next.
Yeah.
So I definitely like what Tammy was saying. Personally, it's like a little different because I'm a girl, so like, and I'm like less threatening, even though there have been women killed. But I've definitely like experienced my brothers being taught that. But what I wanted to say was I wanted to share an experience I had the other day. So my friends and I and like a couple people from school, we set up some protests in Swampscott. And we had one last week. It was more of like a march where we had a few citizens of color, students of color mostly, go up and share their experiences at Phillips Park. And then so we were near the police station after it ended, and I don't know how this came about because I wasn't paying attention to the beginning, but my the people I was with a group of like 8 people, and this police officer came out and he was like, "Oh, like how are you guys doing?" Like, and we started to have a conversation with him. And I personally didn't say anything the whole time because I was just listening. But one of my friends was talking about something she witnessed. I think it was a year or two ago. With Swampscott police, and it was that like one of her like friends of color was racially profiled by the police officer and mistreated, not physically, just verbally. And so she explained this in depth. I won't get into it because it's not really, the details aren't really as important as the message I'm trying to get across. But so my friend explained this to the police officer who was talking to us, and the police officer, their first response was, "Oh, where did this happen? Are you sure it was Swampscott police?" And my friend who told the story confirmed that it was, because I guess she knew who the police officer was, or the person with her knew who it was. And once we confirmed that it was a member of the Swampscott Police Department, the police officer, like, I think figured out who it was because of where it was an off-duty policer and it was by his house. So by like when my friend mentioned where he lived, the police officer then said, "Oh, like we do have a police officer that lives there." And then his next words were, "But I don't see that happening." And that's really disheartening to me that someone that wasn't there would just defend that person instantly just because they're their friend, their colleague. And it's good to defend your friend and your colleague, but not when someone that she didn't directly experience it. She witnessed it happen, and she was very upset because although she's not a person of color, that was kind of like a wake-up call for her, that she wasn't used to this as her friend of color was. She never like seen something like racially motivated thing happen in front of her. And it was really disheartening that her story was dismissed like that, because the first step in solving the problem is to address it. And I think it's important for the white people in this community to realize that just because, you know, something like George Floyd's incident hasn't happened here, it doesn't mean there isn't racism. It doesn't mean like the system's perfect in Swampscott. Like there's no town that can say they don't have racism in it. It can't just like, it's seeped through all of America, and no town, no city is immune to it. Maybe some cities are better than others. Maybe some cities are, you know, like their system might be more flawed than others, but as long as we keep denying it, it's never going to be fixed. So I just wanted to share that experience to show how it's important to address the problems and address the incidents that happen, as uncomfortable as they may be.
Thanks, Mater. Peter?
There really isn't anything important enough for me to say that will distract or make anybody forget what Mater just said. So I would rather her words linger and take a pass on saying anything more. Thanks, Mater, for sharing that with us.
Great. Thank you all for your response. So I think at this time, I know we had a break scheduled for to go into round 3, but I think at this time what we'll do is we will start to transition a little bit more into some closing remarks for us, so that we can have Julie then close with her poem and have that resonate, just very similar to what Peter had just said. As far as Mata's words, we want the last thing to be the poem that she shares to resonate with us. And then what we'll do is we'll plan on another day that we will follow up with our third question, and then the community questions that were shared with myself and Julie as well. So I think if it's okay, we'll just start for the closing round, and if all the panelists will just go alphabetical as we did at the beginning. If all the panelists can just remind the attendees of their name, and just if you want to say your role, that's as well, kind of do like a reverse introduction for a closing. And then you can either, for a closing remark, you can state what your hope is for this, what, you know, and I believe that Ruth, you said it best as far as your plan of action. So what is a plan of action looking like? Or you can just say, you know, where you are with this weather report, any type of closing remark that you feel is comfortable to you and from the heart that you want to end this modified restorative circle with. Okay. Melissa, I'm going to have you go first.
I keep forgetting to unmute. Sorry. I'm Melissa Albert, or Albert. I'm a French teacher, world language at the high school in Swampscott. And I guess I just want to say that, first of all, I think that this process today has been really a demonstration of the power of a restorative circle. I think it's worked really well, even in a virtual format. And, you know, giving everybody space and time to speak from their heart and listen from their heart. And the fact that we've only gotten through 2 questions in 2.5 hours tells me that there is a lot that people want to say and need to say. and that this is only just the very, like a drop in the bucket of the work that we really need to be doing in our community. And so my hope is that this is not just like a, one and done, flash in the pan sort of a situation, and that we will engage with this work. It is so essential. And it actually gives me hope, and listening to all the students and learning from the panelists. And I just hope that this is something that we really run with, because we have some momentum now. We have an opening, and I think we really need to run with it. So that's my final thought.
Great, thank you. Chief Archer.
Graham Archer, the Chief of the Swampscott Fire Department. I'd like to also thank everyone for joining today, and I hope that we have a lot more of these with a lot different mixtures of people, different mixtures of voices, and I hope we challenge ourselves honestly with some voices that might, push back more on us on some future forums as well. I look forward to engaging people in this way. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Graham. Temmie?
I'm Temmie Bailey, MAP tutor, as well as the coordinator for the Boys of Color program, and I coach basketball at Swampscott High. All honesty, I feel like this was like definitely a powerful meeting, especially having Al and Madeir. Am I saying your name right, Madeir?
It's Mader.
Mader. My apologies. Having you two just like, especially being students, speak on your stories, speak on your experiences, having grown and been in Swampscott longer than I have. I feel like that, especially your teachers having to listen to that, like I feel like that definitely resonated well with them. Me personally, I'm just happy that people were able to honestly get something out of this. Like I've been on the Facebook group. I saw a family comment saying that they watched as a group on YouTube, and it was very informational for them. So like the fact that we touched someone, honestly, is something for me.
Great, thank you, Temmie. Jeff?
So I also would like to really thank everyone for their honesty and their openness and their willingness to share their experiences and their thoughts on a lot of these really challenging topics right now. I think it's been uplifting and inspirational in some ways, in many ways actually, and I took an awful lot out of people's opinions and perspectives and realities, things I would not have known, things I very much appreciate knowing, and I think we have a really good panel and a good dialogue going. I think we can continue this, and I'm hopeful that we can get some action out of the things that we've all uncovered and all seem to collectively understand is happening, not just in our community, but in our towns, in our states, in our country in general. So I'm just thankful for that, and I'm looking forward to the next round. Oh, and I forgot to say, Jeff Comfort, and I'm a Swampscott parent. I have two girls, one freshman coming into the high school and one going into junior year. So good luck to me.
Thank you. Al?
My name is Al Bangura. I'm an uprising junior. I've been going to Swampscott High School all my life. Hadley. I'm repping Hadley. I know going down, but I'm still repping them. Honestly, I just want people to understand that life is a very, very, very long time, and people don't understand how other people were affected by things sometimes, and I feel like people have to understand that like everything is a snowball, like an avalanche. It's just gonna keep building and building and building. So I just want to remind like everybody that like Black people in this country were enslaved for over 400 years. We literally just got our civil rights like less than 60 years ago. My my grandfather literally was a slave, and my grandfather was a slave. Like we are just getting started. Like we are just getting started. Like just like Miss Albert said, we are literally just getting started. Like it's literally just getting started. So I would just like to thank everybody that stayed in it, the loyal ones, because I know some of y'all left. We had 70 plus, and I was 50. I don't know what that's about, but like I would just like to thank like the loyal attendees and like everybody who has been open-minded throughout this process and just is willing to like learn and hear from those who I'll say are, to those who are much more involved with this movement, even if it's on purpose or by mistake. Me personally, I'll just say this. I didn't even like do none of this for this year. Ask Miss O. Like those soaking meetings, I didn't do none of this. So like I want to thank all of you, and I really think we can make a change with this panel and like just getting our voices out there. So thank all of you for just being open-minded.
Great, thank you, Al. Ruth?
My name is Ruth Dossie, and it's Ruth actually. It's it's our youth. It sounds, the H is silent actually. It's French. The H is totally silent. So my name is Ruth Dossie, and I am a parent of middle school students, and I'm very passionate about Swampscott, and also I'm here, and I hope that is not the last time. And I hope the community actually, we don't make this as a rendezvous. Like it's a point that we came here just spend a couple of hours, but when we left here, so we actually imply what we heard of.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for the correction. Holly?
Hi, Holly Flanagan, and I'm an English teacher at the high school. So that means I've been telling stories and reading stories and listening to stories in the classroom for almost 20 years. So I believe in the power of this. And in the last year, just began work with Colleen in the restorative practices and Suffolk University, their restorative justice program, and co-led with her the professional development this year, where we had about 25 faculty and staff and administration who are now going to pilot in their own ways different restorative practices. And so I'm here tonight because I believe in it. And I spent time in my classroom this year, starting in circle and sitting in circle. And you can see that it takes a lot of time, but it's incredible work and really worthwhile. And in doing so, you build community and you build connection and you improve relationships, and hopefully you pull people closer. And I also was part of different groups this year where all of the conversations in the data really revealed the same thing, whether it would be the restorative practices or the Safe and Supportive Schools grant that Dennis and others wrote to work to fund some of this same conversation. The Social Emotional District Committee work, all of these conversations are the same. How does everyone feel safe and included? And if I could be a bit provocative, you know, the data reveals that we have a lot of kind, well-intentioned, nice individuals, staff, faculty, educators, but not comfortable with this conversation, not necessarily wanting to have this conversation in the classroom and not knowing how. And I think when we realize that we don't need to have the answers, we need to do the work. And like tonight, we hear the stories of those who have some of the answers. That is when we learn. So I'm excited about the restorative practices and excited to hear more stories. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Holly. Dennis?
Dennis Kohut, Swampscott High School principal. Thanks to Julie and Colleen for putting this together, and also to Holly, as she mentioned, for doing a lot of work around restorative practices this year. And that's something that we've been working on, kind of small steps over the course of the past couple of years. But we've had a lot of students participate. I know Al has participated in some, Mater has participated in some. I'm not sure if Alex did, but the goal here would be Alex as well. So that's great. And one of our goals, this is part of our school improvement plan, is to have more of these restorative circles, right? And I think there's some momentum coming out of this, right? And then I think it's powerful to have this experience and to hear what these kids said. I mean, that's really powerful for me, especially what Al had said about feeling that you were sort of starting in the back, so to speak. And that's, as someone who's in charge of a school, as someone who's a teacher, that's a hard thing to hear, right? But I'm going to keep that as we start to think about what we're going to do and plan for next year. I'm going to keep that comment out in the forefront of my mind as we're doing some planning. And for the students who are in this, kudos to you, hats off to you for doing this, for participating in this, and also for just being so vulnerable and sharing. This cannot be easy. This isn't easy for any of the adults, but for you guys, particularly the students and folks of color on this panel, this has to be just really difficult to talk about this and air it out in such a public way. So thank you for that. And as Colleen said, we'll continue to work from this, and I'll see you again when we do the next round of the panel.
Great, thank you, Dennis. Chief Madigan?
Thank you. Ron Madigan, police chief here in Swampscott. It seems to me that there's significant momentum for change going on right now. That's obvious. From the police department standpoint, we always place great value on community trust and confidence in our police department, and so we really relied on the support of the police department from the community. It appears we're missing that right now, or at least certainly from a portion of the community, and certainly not connecting with those folks of color in town. That really means that we need to work harder. We've got our work cut out for us to try to open up lines of communication, and become more comfortable ourselves with doing outreach and reaching out into the community. I've been doing a lot of listening the last few weeks and hearing perspectives that I never really understood. And rest assured, we're interested here in the police department and working together to make the world a better place, and for all of us and our children. It's something that we hope to be a part of, rather than, I think my own feelings is there's been way too much polarization and division in the country the last several years, and it's something that at least locally, I hope we can bridge the gaps that may exist and work more closely with everyone and work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
My name is Chris Norkin, the Dean of Students at Swampscott High School. And I wanted to take this moment to say hi to Miss Dorsey, but I see she just disappeared. But I wanted to say hi to Miss Dorsey and let her know that her words from round 2 have really been resonating with me. And they've been allowing me to interrogate my own thoughts and perspectives, and hopefully get to meet you, Miss Dorsey, face to face sooner than later.
Great, thank you. Latoya?
I'm Latoya Ogunbona. I am the Swampscott Public Schools Micro Director, and I'm also the Students of Color Advisory Advisor. I'm hopeful for continued conversations, for us to really see the humanity in one another and also the people that are marginalized and oppressed globally and domestically. I really hope for community healing and continued work, especially with the youth on this call and the youth that are really just not taking it anymore. Specifically for my SOCA students, my MECO students. I'm so proud of all of you guys, and it takes a lot to stand up, and you guys are doing it, and this is not normal, and you have to continue fighting and doing better than the previous generations because they gave you something and now you have to continue it. And that not only goes for the SOCA students or MECO students, but for white students as well and other students of color. Anybody who has stake in this earth, you have a responsibility. And it's never too late to change your mind. For the people who are on this call, it's never too late to change maybe some of the things that are more traditional because the world has changed. And I feel like in some ways we're not catching up, but I'm hopeful that this conversation is a chance to begin to see the humanity in one another.
Thank you, Latoya. Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex Roos. I'm an incoming senior, and I'm really happy to have participated in this discussion. It's great to hear so many different perspectives, which is uncommon, I think, in the school. I think that as a community, we still have so much work to do, not just at like a systemic level, but on a personal level. For example, throughout like, I think freshman year, I would say I was in a class and I heard teachers, for example, saying to students of color, like, take off your hood, or like these types of microaggressions that are so entrenched in society. Like, we need to, I think, educators, students, everyone, we need to sort of pull back these layers and really unlearn these harmful things that and these stereotypes that are entrenched in society now. And I think that through this conversation and through continued conversation, I'm very hopeful that we can peel back these layers and we can begin to discuss how to support our students of color in Swampscott more. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Peter?
My name is Peter Spelios, and I'm the chair of the Swampscott Select Board, and I'm here to learn. And Mater, Al, Temi, Graham, Latoya, Root, I want you to know that I hear you, and I'm really grateful for you sharing with all of us. And I want you to know that the discomfort I feel having these conversations, I know is nothing compared to the discomfort that you describe living with every day. And that actually motivates me to stay in this space and to continue being uncomfortable. And I know when we talk about a plan of action, that plan of action is my responsibility, not your responsibility. So thank you for sharing.
I'm sorry. I know this is against the rules. I'm sorry. But we can't act like we don't know what happened with Don Haas. So as you just told that and you just said that to me, I want to see some action on your part as the leader of the select board, because we all know what happened with Don Haas and that whole situation. So I want to thank you for that statement that you made, and I'm going to hold you accountable for the things you just said. Thank you very much, Mr. Steele.
Al, I think that's really fair, and I'm glad that you spoke up.
Thank you. Okay, Mara?
So I think the most important thing about this is that I'm glad we had a conversation. I'm glad, like some like some conversation is starting to be made, but I just want to like emphasize the fact that this isn't going to be over for a very long time. This is probably something that we're going to have to fight for the rest of our lives, and it can be exhausting. It's not, like a fun thing to do. It's not like fun to constantly deal with like blatant racism, whether it be like, well, for people of color towards them, and for allies, they still have to witness that and call it out. And it's not an easy thing, but it's worth gaining quality. So I just want to emphasize the fact that this isn't going to be over anytime soon. So I hope all of you are in for the long haul. And I also wanted to piggyback off what Alex Roos said about the microaggressions that students of color face, like even in the school, and that often goes unnoticed because when people think racism, they think of a Black person being called the N-word or what happened to George Floyd or police brutality, but it can be as small as a microaggression that people don't even notice, that white people don't even realize is offensive, but us people of color do, or most of us do at least. And like one of the things that like the school, not necessarily a school, but like it's kind of like a school related thing, is the cornrows at Powder Puff. And that's like an example of cultural appropriation, which is a microaggression, and it might seem harmless to everyone, but I know myself and other Black girls mostly take offense to this, and they're often just like dismissed by their white counterparts because, oh, like, how is this harmful? Like, we're not doing anything bad, but it actually really is harmful, and it's just disheartening to be like dismissed because it's not a direct like racist comment or racist action that's being made, but it's still very harmful. And I think that it's really important to realize that even the little things add up, and the little things kind of build the struggles of students of color at the school. And I hope like those things are addressed soon, so we can work up towards making bigger changes. And I want to thank everyone for coming today because it means a lot. And I hope to see you guys again soon.
Great. Thank you. So I think I'll let Julie close, but I just want to say one thing, Mana, you had said that you're tired and people are tired of fighting. So I'm hoping that this committee and this group, that we will continue to fight, and we will fight together, and we will make sure that we have a plan of action when we start to conclude this. But I just hope that we continue, just as LaToya said, humanity, and just push through, and we continue to have these uncomfortable conversations, and we continue to push the boundaries on what we're feeling, and to continue to speak from the heart. So I thank every single one of the panelists. I thank every person that, as Al said, stayed through the end, and I thank those who were here and observed this. And so Julie, I'll turn it over to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. So I'm just going to share my screen for it's a closing poem. And before I do that, I just want to thank you all again for being here. It really means a lot. Just to echo, I hope that this is the first of many conversations in the Swampscott public school systems, in the community, and being a teacher there for the students on this panel, any students that can hear me right now. I hope that we can all work together in the future to make Swampscott High a more welcoming place for all. I have your back. So I'm going to share my screen really quick, and then we are going to close it out, and I can read the last poem with you. Okay, so here is our closing poem. It says, most importantly, love like it's the only thing you know how. At the end of the day, all of this means nothing. This page, where you're sitting, your degree, your job, the money, nothing even matters except love and human connection. Who you loved and how deeply you loved them, how you touched the people around you, and how much you gave them. By Rupi Kaur.